Hello, my name's Nick Denny, and in this video we're covering the API call edit page. Before you can start monitoring, you have to create an API call. You can do this by clicking on the Add API Call button at the sidebar, or clicking the link here. This takes you to the API edit page. Each API call has a name. This is something for your reference. The key things here, it has a method, so this is the HTTP method. We've got get and post are the most common ones. We have the full URL, including the scheme. Next are the URL parameters. You can enter the values here. And then the authentication settings. We'll cover this in a separate video. Last thing we're going to look at immediately is the accept header here. We can add a different header here. And we could add some value or a variable. You can see at the bottom here we have a preview. On our more zoomed out page, this is on the right hand side. And the preview shows you the URL, including the URL parameters we've entered and the headers. If we had a body, that would appear below. So we can save that API call and select Run. And in fact, note that on the drop down you can pick the specific location we want to run the API call from. And then you can see that this API call passed and it returned a 200 OK. The source IP address of our agent and the IP address of the destination API. The time of when we made the API call and the total latency, and then some log messages, including conditions if you've got any set. The next section is the timing data. Not only is it the total latency we measure, but we look at individual components of that time. So the time it takes for the DNS lookup, how long it takes us to look up google.apimetrics.xyz in this case and get an IP address for it. And then the TCP connect time, how long it takes to make a connection, and the SSL handshake time, how long it takes to make the secure connection and the SSL handshake. And then the upload, processing and download time. On this API call, the download time is the largest. Often we'll see the processing time being the longest, and the upload is usually very, very short because usually we're making very small API calls. Depending on the architecture of your API, it may depend on whether you always see a large download or you see a large processing time. For us, processing time is the time between the last byte of the upload sent and the first byte of the response returned. So if the API call waits and then returns the response all at once, we'll see a long processing time. However, if the API returns immediately and then streams the response back to us, we'll see a larger download time, which appears to be what happened here. For example, this is a different API call, and here we can see the processing time was all the time and there was no upload and download. The gauges show you how you compare to an average API call. This is a very quick one, but if any component was especially slow, they would be in red and high. Next is the HTTP request. So this is the request we made, including the variable that's been substituted in. And then this is the response we got back from our server. So it includes the 200 OK and all the headers. And then it's the response content. And in fact, because it's JSON, we can pretty print this and so this makes it easier to read at the bottom here. At the bottom, to help you if you're using workflows, it shows you the variables you've used. Now let's go back to the Edit API call page. Now let's change this to a post. So we know there's a post endpoint as well as a get endpoint for this API, so I update the URL and I change the method to post. Now we get a warning here saying we don't normally put URL parameters in a post message, so I'm going to delete these. And I can pick a content type for my post body. I'm going to say URL encoded. Note I could say JSON here, and we can just enter JSON normally as text and then have it on multiple lines if necessary. But I'm going to stick with the URL encoded and post it like a web form. Click Save. And you can see here in the preview we're now doing a post method. There's no URL parameters. We've got an extra content type header with the form URL encoded content type, and then the body is the URL encoded data. So we can now run that again. And we get a pass again, and down at the bottom here we can see our JSON, and we see here that we have form test2 equals the value 12345. So let's add a check for that in the conditions. Let's go back to the edit page. Conditions are set on the Conditions tab. Here we can check for various values and change the result of the API call accordingly. So we can check on the HTTP status code. So we could say we want the status code to be, say, exactly 200, and if it's not, we could say it's a warning. Normally any 200 is a pass anyway, but this would mean a 201 is also a warning. We could check the response size, and we could say if the response size is greater than or equal to, say, a large value, we could say that was an error. We can add a check to the headers, check that APImetrics exists. If not, make that a warning. And then probably the most important one to use is the response body. In the response body we pass the JSON sent to it, so we can say form.test2, and that will look inside the JSON, and let's say we want that to always equal 12345, and if it's not, we're going to say that's an error. Here, note we can also set a variable, and that would set whatever the contents of that form.test2 is to that variable. Variables are used in workflows and will be covered in a separate video. Lastly, you can set a timing value, so we can check, say, if the total time it takes, or let's say if the DNS time takes more than 4 seconds, then make this an SLA warning. So save all these conditions. Note we've not changed the onTrue value on any of these conditions, because by default the API call is passing. We don't need to change a pass into a pass. We only need to change a pass into a fail if something does not match up. Now we probably don't actually want the headers or the response size or the status code checks, so let's remove them before we run this so we can save it and run the API call. You can see here we received a warning, and we can see in the logs that we checked that the form.test2 is 12345 is true, and the variable test2 has been set to 12345. The condition for the SLAs on the project level is false, but the extra condition we added for DNS lookup greater than 4000 is false. So the SLA warning, response too slow, has been set. We'll want to change the conditions and make sure we're getting passing APIs consistently before we can schedule this. And that will conclude this introduction video. Thank you.